Good morning, everyone. Welcome to Webinar 12. I am Dr. Riza Lorenzana, Chair of the Ako Para sa Bata 2020. The 12th Ako Para sa Bata is presented by the Child Protection Network Foundation and UNICEF. Our theme this year is Care of the Child Against Violence in the Time of Disease. Again, if you are not yet following us, please do follow the Ako Para sa Bata social media accounts and feel free to tag us. And please include the hashtag COVID-APSB 2020 in your posts. Again, it's hashtag COVID-APSB 2020. Today is another day of learning. To those who joined the previous Ako Para sa Bata webinars, welcome back. And for the first-timers, welcome to the Ako Para sa Bata community. On behalf of the Child Protection Network Foundation and UNICEF, we are grateful for each and every one of you. As in the previous webinars, we are full capacity in our Zoom account. And we are joined by many others on Facebook Live. The Ako Para sa Bata 2020 webinars are a service to the Women and Children Protection Unit members and the entire Ako Para sa Bata community. Ako, tayo, para sa bata. It's about 10 a.m. Let's begin today's session. I will introduce you to the moderator of today's webinar. So she is the head of the Women and Child Protection Unit at the Bicol Medical Center. She is also the chair of the hospital's Department of Pediatrics. My fellow ambulatory pediatrician, let us welcome the moderator of the webinar on how to handle grief, Dr. Micheline Taup Tolentino. Over to you, Dr. Mitz.
Thank you, Rizzy, for that seamless introduction. Good morning, everyone, here on Zoom and those on Facebook Live, to those who came in early and those who will be viewing us later on in the day. So again, let us congratulate each other. This is, we have now 12,000 followers on Facebook, and this is our 12th webinar and the 12th year of Ako Para sa Bata. So although this is quite a celebratory topic, the topic for today is not as fancy. It will be on a prominent issue during this pandemic. So kindly sit back and we will learn a lot from our speakers today. So the title again of our session is How to Handle Grief. And to introduce our speaker and to give his thoughts on this topic, may I call on our guest. He is a highly respected and sought-after resource speaker. He has quite an impressive background in the field of child, adolescent, and adult psychiatry, a professor emeritus at the University of the Philippines College of Medicine. Ladies and gentlemen, let us all welcome Dr. Cornelio Banaan Jr.
Good morning, everybody, and thank you, Mitch, Dr. Mitch, and welcome to the 12th session of this year's Ako Para sa Bata program. It's always been a source of pride and pleasure for me to be part of Ako Para sa Bata in whatever capacity. I'm obviously playing a very different role this time because I have a dear friend who has a better grasp of what this topic is all about today. And so let me move on with our speaker. We're very fortunate today to have someone who deals with this sad arena of grief, which many people don't want to talk about because it is sad, without knowing that grief, when unspoken, can leave very long-lasting impact in our lives. Our speaker is certified in the grief recovery method, as well as in mental health first aid. But it took her a long journey to get to this point. She is a product of the Ateneo University and the Miriam College, And soon as she did her college work, she found her niche in communication. Does she work as communication manager in several well-known organizations, including some pharmaceutical companies? Not talking about pharmaceutical products, but about community involvement, nutritionals. She has always been engaged and very interested in health, particularly health of children and women. She has been for many years a lecturer at the Ateneo University on the topic of the dynamics of grief in the Filipino family context. It took her a long time to find that this is her calling. She has received many awards, but I don't need to go into in the interest of time. Uh, but she has also written. She's very well known in the print media. You read her in the daily broadsheets. You know, she continues to be a columnist at the Philippine Daily Inquirer, where she used to work as a reporter in the lifestyle section. She now also has walked into the broadcast media with her conversations with Kathy, in which I hope one day I will be with her. And she has written many printed materials. But relevant to our conversations this morning are two books that to me appears to be very moving. One is a children's book called Heaven's Butterfly, which is all about helping children go through the grief process after losing a loved one. And parallel to this book is another book entitled Between Loss and Forever, which is all about the journey of Filipino mothers on the as they travel the grief journey. So we have today, and I'm very proud to present, a coach on a difficult area called grief. So with pride and pleasure, let me introduce to you and give to you a dear friend, Miss Catherine Sanchez Babao. Kathy, take it away.
Okay. Thank you very much, Dr. Banaag, and thank you so much to the Child Protection Network for hosting this talk on grief, which is okay. Sorry about that. So I'm thankful for the Child Protection Network for hosting this talk on grief, and thank you, Dr. Banaag, for that introduction. So today I'm going to discuss with you something, a topic that is very, very close to my heart, something that I'm very passionate about. Okay. So let's start with some facts and numbers, okay? So we know that there have been so many deaths due to COVID-19. Globally, it's been 1.09 million. Can you imagine that? And they say that for every death, usually, there are at least 5 people who are mourning or grieving that death. So if you have 1.09 million, that's 5+ million globally. In the Philippines, right now, at any given time, you have 32,600 people in grief. And this is only the ones due to death. Cremation rates, according to one of the biggest funeral, how do you call them, funeral services in the country, have gone up from 45% to 85%, almost double versus burials. No, I understand that even non-COVID deaths, the families have what do you call this? The families have opted to cremate their loved ones. The Philippines has 347,000 cases total to date. So even those cases alone will result in some form of grief. So let's just go with a quick definition of grief. Grief is a response to loss that affects our physical, emotional, and behavioral, social, financial, and spiritual lives. It does not only occur in response to death, but any loss can cause us to grieve. And how many losses have we experienced so far in this pandemic, di ba? Sobrang dami na. So what is the difference between grief and mourning? Okay, grief is the constellation of feelings and emotions that a bereaved person or a person who has gone through loss experiences. Mourning is the expression, it is the outpouring of your emotions and your feelings. Let's say, for example, can you see this flask that I'm holding? So the container is grief, okay? And all the feelings, the water is the emotions, the anger, the anxiety, the sadness that you feel. Mourning is when you pour the water out of the bottle. So there is a big difference. Talking about the loss, crying, writing, expressing through art, remembering our loved ones during special occasions, those are all forms of mourning. In the Philippine tradition, and even in other countries, I believe, a wake often kicks off the mourning process. Okay? And mourning is the requirement for healing. You cannot heal from a loss if you do not mourn. So remember that, no? You cannot heal from a loss if you do not mourn. And we have, like I mentioned, so very many losses during this period. There is loss of routine and freedom, loss of employment, diba? What is our current employment rate now? We have lost the ability to freely visit our loved ones and our friends. No, we can't go see our senior parents. If we have family that was supposed to travel here, ngayon hindi sila makatravel and neither can we leave and go see them. We have many ambiguous losses. Of course, there's been countless loss of life. And most of all, we have lost the opportunity to be physically present with people who are dying or grieving. And I understand that in this audience, 48%, no, of us have experienced a loss during this COVID-19. I have, lost a very good friend last May due to COVID-19. A very good friend of mine lost, both his parents. I have had two friends actually who have lost both their senior parents because of the pandemic. So that's really a heavy, heavy toll. So how do we help? How do we help those who have lost loved ones? One of the most important ways that we can learn how to help those who are going through a loss is to increase our grief literacy. But that's why I'm very glad that CPN has this webinar today, because this is really a very topic that is often not discussed, di ba? Parang ayaw pag-usapan kasi malungkot, or huwag natin pag-usapan kasi baka ini-invite mo. So no, those are all myths. So grief literacy. We, increase our financial literacy. So therefore, we also need to increase our grief literacy. Grief literacy calls on all of us to be better acquainted, to better understand grief, so that we can support not just one another, but also ourselves, okay? We define grief literacy as the capacity to access, process, and use knowledge regarding the experience of loss. How I wish that, there would be more webinars about, how people can increase their grief literacy. So this is a start, because I know that there are a lot of you listening now, social workers, frontliners, medical doctors. So I hope in your experiences of loss, this is a start. No? This is a capacity we all need in the midst of this pandemic. And we know that this pandemic is still going to be with us for quite a while. So it's important that we become adept, that we increase our grief literacy. Experience of grief during COVID-19 is complicated. Because number one, yun na nga, there are so many restrictions, right? So for example, we may feel grief at not being able to be at the bedside of someone who is dying. So it really makes it so difficult, no, for families, for friends. Diba tayo, especially as, you know, Filipinos, we really like to go and be at the bedside of a sick loved one. But now we cannot do that because of the very nature of the disease, no? We cannot visit, we cannot accompany them when they're sick, or so we cannot accompany them during their last hours. We may also feel grief because we cannot engage in familiar rituals when someone dies. Wala, hindi tayo pwede mag-wake. We don't even get to see the person, you know, before he or she is cremated. We cannot, well, now we can hold wakes and funerals, but they're very restricted, no? Very small number. And when you're there, you can't, you know, you can't shake hands, you can't hug. So we are losing so many things, and the bereaved is not able to receive, you know, the support that they would normally receive um, in pre-pandemic times. Okay. Grievers typically find solace in the routines of work and faith. So church, diba? You go to church, you're able to go, sometimes you have colleagues at work or you have friends who can help you through your grief. These are not readily available anymore now. No? People cannot reach out and touch someone, so it's harder to support someone who is grieving. Talagang we have to work and we have to be creative within the parameters that we are living now. No? And we see that, like funeral homes now, di ba? Marami ng e-lamay, e-burol. You know, you can do everything virtually now. You can write, they've put up memorial pages. Of course, it's really not the same, but you know, we have to make do with what is there, di ba? Rather than wala naman tayong gawin. Okay? So, I put this in quotes, no? We just use the term as in discussion. So what is a bad death? How is it described? Daily statistics, the numbers that we see every day, focuses really on the number of deaths, and hardly any attention is given to the families or to the loved ones, no, who are left behind. Okay, COVID-related fatalities embody the attributes of a quote-unquote bad death. No, and a bad death makes it more devastating, harder for the people who are left behind because ang daming complicating factors, right? So many worries, so many uncertainties, right? Okay, so loss of routine and activity that once structured their days. What is the definition of a bad death versus a good death? A bad death is defined as a poor quality death marked by physical discomfort, difficulty breathing, isolation, psychological distress, lack of preparation, being treated without respect or dignity. You've seen this, no, in the US, in Europe, yung ang dami nila talagang deaths na patong-patong na lang, you know, or they like just put on one side. This is lack of dignity for, you know, for the dead person. And of course, the receipt of unwanted medical interventions or being deprived of the treatment that one desires because the healthcare system is just too overburdened. So this is what is described as a bad death. A good death is marked by physical comfort, emotional and spiritual well-being, preparation on the part of the patient and the family, and the person is surrounded by loved ones in a peaceful environment, treated with respect and dignity, and receiving the treatment in alignment with their wishes. So it said, how can we, in the context that we are living now, how can we minimize, you know, incidents of bad death? You know, now life is so uncertain, diba? Anything can happen because we're living with this virus. So I know that as a people, and I know this, you know, from my own relatives and some of my friends, you really don't like to talk about death, diba? But now is as good a time as any to discuss it with your family, to talk about it and put it on the table. You know, you cannot be too young to be ready for lahat naman tayo papunta doon, di ba? So to minimize this para it won't be a quote-unquote bad death, it's good to prepare, you know. I remember, because death has been a reality, you know, in my family. I've known death as a child when my father passed on and I was just 16. I've known death when my son died and I was a young mother. So the year I turned 50, and I'll just share this, the year I turned 50, it's not exactly advanced directives, but, you know, I sat one of my children down and I had a full list, you know, indicating, okay, if this is what happens, this is what I want you to do. This is the kind of treatment, only up to here. So maganda na pinag-uusapan natin. And, you know, when you talk about it, it does not mean that you're inviting it into your life. No, mas maganda na maayos, na nakahanda lahat, so that whatever, di ba, in the eventuality, it's clear. They're not, you know, your family is not all over the place. Ano kaya ang gusto niya? Ano kaya ang gagawin niya? Until what kind of medical intervention pa ang gusto niya kaya? So that's one way of, you know, lowering the cases of what is defined as a bad death. So go ahead and, you know, talk about it with your family members. Why are bad deaths difficult to grieve? This is why we want, you know, the bad deaths numbers to go down, because they really are very, very difficult for the ones left behind. And I know this, and I have seen this because I have many clients who have lost loved ones very suddenly, you know, to COVID-19. As in, walang panahon para maghanda. Dinala sa ospital, they're gone in 2 days. You know, dinala sa ospital, they're gone in the afternoon or in the evening. Or they're in the hospital a long time, they suddenly take a turn for the worse, di nakapaghanda. So, kawawa ang naiwanan, di ba? So, death context, or the quality of the death, or the circumstances surround the death, no, predicts survivor symptoms of depression, anger, anxiety, and risk of complicated grief. Well, a lot of the deaths now happening in this period, lalo pag hindi talaga nakapaghanda yung pamilya, will result, you know, in a complicated grief. If you lose a child, you're the parent, you lose your child to COVID-19, that could possibly result in complicated grief. Oops. Okay. Bereaved family members have heightened, magnified psychological symptoms when they're not able to have an opportunity to say goodbye. And we see this a lot because nga sometimes bigla, di ba? And we can't visit them in the hospital hanggang video call lang or video chat, no? When the decedent was in pain, when the death was unexpected, when they perceived that the death was unjust and could have been prevented, or when the death occurred in an ICU or a hospital rather than at home, and the treatments received were intrusive or not in accordance with what the patient wanted. There is also a lot of guilt, diba? There's a lot of regret because nga of the very nature of the virus. Paano nangyari? Kanino nakuha? Could it have been prevented? So many factors. Bereaved persons who believe their loved one's death came too quickly, too young, or too unjustly due to a lack of appropriate care may experience anger and a desire to cast blame in order to make sense of or seek retribution for the loss. So you see a lot of blame, diba? A lot of regret, a lot of, dapat dinala ko na siya sa ospital nung isang araw, I may have brought him too late, or I wanted to say this, I was not able to say this. So this COVID-19, dying through COVID-19 really complicates a lot of things. No? I really feel for all the families, who have lost loved ones to COVID-19. It's the suddenness of it all and the very nature of it. No? Sometimes it really ravages your body such that you really suffer before you go. Plus, there are other stressors, that add to it, that add to the grief. Bad deaths are distressing under normal circumstances, diba? Yet the pandemic has created a context in which the pain of loss is really magnified further by other stressors. What are these stressors? According to the WHO, social isolation, no? So the way that we live our lives, financial precarity, a lot of people have lost their businesses, so it impacts their economics. Health concerns, worries about other family members, deaths of other friends and family, and your own anxiety about your own mortality, di ba? So daming stressors. And when stressors accumulate, they will really tend to overwhelm the belief. So, how can we help through grief literacy? Okay. First and foremost, it's very important to be aware of your own feelings, your own experience. What is your attitude towards death, right? How do you feel towards death? Because the way you relate to others, you have to know yourself first, because it will impact the way that, the way that you relate to the bereaved, or the way that you talk about death, or your attitude about death. And then remember, it's okay, like the Korean drama, it's okay to not be okay. Can't be okay 100% of the time, especially during this period. Talagang imposible yon. I think you have to be a robot, to be like okay 100% of the time. There are days, that your battery, if you think of your cell phone, there are days when your battery is just at 50%. There are days when you're at 70%. So it's so important to know what you're feeling and to accept and to address it. So grief takes many forms, and it is unique from person to person. Even if like two people who have lost loved ones to COVID-19, let's say two seniors, yun lang ang similarity nila, that their loved ones were seniors at they died to COVID-19, but everything else will impact individual A and individual B's experience. Hindi mo alam ano ba yung dynamics, di ba? Did they have a close relationship? Did this person have the relationship was not so good? Were they close? Were they not close? So you cannot compare. Do not ever compare grief of one person and another person, okay? Also, it does not have stages. I know a lot of us know, and we thank Elizabeth Kubler-Ross for her 5 stages, but they are just labels. They don't go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I'm in denial today. Maybe in a few days I will accept. And then she designed that more for people who are at the end of life. So they're good, they're labels, but don't put pressure on yourself na, bakit nandito pa ako sa stage na to? As human beings, we like stages because we like measures to see if we're like moving forward. But unfortunately, that's not the way with grief. You who have lost loved ones know that you can be okay today and 3 days later not be okay. It's like 2 steps forward, 3 steps backward, 3 steps forward, 1 step backward. It's really more like a dance. So just like when we are advised to put on our own oxygen masks before we help others, as social workers, as doctors, as nurses, you're in the helping profession, you have to remember that, you have to help yourself first. You have to understand your own experience before you support someone else. Diba sa aeroplano, in the days when we could still fly freely, right? What does the flight attendant say? Put on your oxygen mask first before you help another person. Diba? Kasi kung hindi, mauubos ka, so hindi mo rin sila matutulungan. Diba? Okay. Next. Okay. Grief literacy skills. What are grief literacy skills? Compassionate listening. Listen. Listen to understand, right? Listen to understand. Listen with your heart. Listen with your ears. Not just with your ears, but also with your heart. With all of you, diba? When you're in the helping profession, and like, Dr. Banag knows this, and I know all of you who like listen to your patients, talagang you have to be all there. Ask questions. Be very careful, diba, with the questions that you ask. Make sure to be sensitive to their needs. We have to really watch what we say, lalo na with someone who has experienced a loss. Help grieving individuals, find resources. There are so many resources now online, good ones, no? You can increase your knowledge. You can increase your grief literacy by going to reliable sites and reading up on laws. If you work with, well, like everybody here, like, right, works with children, there are so many good sites that provide guidelines on what you can do to help the children that you are helping or to help families, right? Okay, so very important is connection. Connection, connection, connection. Okay. We need to reach out in old and new ways. Diba yung old ways na nagwe-wake, na ganito, ganyan, 40 days, 1 year, hindi yun pwede ngayon eh, diba? So what can we do? We can continue to write letters, send messages, text messages, emails. But you know, I really like still the old-fashioned way of receiving cards and letters. That is a lost art that we can revive during this period. We can send packages in the mail, no? Here in Metro Manila, there's always so easy because there's so many courier services now, right? We can connect via text, call, video chat, or social media, no? Social media can be good, can be bad. So I hope that you always choose to use it for the good, to provide encouragement and to provide inspiration. We cannot fix grief, okay? And we must not fix it, but we can offer our attention and time to reduce the isolation that a lot of us are feeling, you know, during this period. Can you imagine, you know, namatayan ka na nga and then you feel so isolated, right? What is your most important need? Your most important need really would be for connection, for people to reach out, no? If you are on the side naman that, you know, by God's grace, you have not lost anybody to COVID, then you offer, you know, and you reach out to those who may need your help and your support. So before I move to the next topic, which is, you know, I'll help give you concrete ways on how you can help children who are grieving. I would like to show a very short video before we continue.
The COVID-19 pandemic is not only a medical crisis, but a psychological one. Along with the collective anxiety, stress, and sadness comes collective loss and sorrow. Loss can shake our senses of self. Many of us will have to cope with the loss of loved ones in the midst of this pandemic. Many are also grieving their sense of safety, of social connection, of financial security. Losing a job, not having a graduation ceremony, not being able to attend a funeral, all are losses to be grieved. What we are experiencing now is a living loss, and as we move forward, people will continue to experience losses we can't yet predict. Psychologists say that in addition to grieving what is now missing from our lives, we may also grieve for the ways in which those losses affect our senses of self and personal identity. If part of who you are is defined by social interactions, what does it mean for you when you are quarantined at home? It helps to name and claim our grief. People often have a vague sense of anxiety or suffering, but putting words to those losses can help them identify ways to move forward. Psychologists recommend journaling to help with this process. Since most of us have never been through anything like this, it can help to explore how you got through another challenging transition, like a divorce or losing your job. How did you heal and recover through that process? You can likely apply some of those strategies to this situation. Social connections are still important. Psychologists encourage people to stay connected with their social support networks through phone calls, text messages, video chat, and social media. For many people, it will take time to recover from their losses. Keep checking in on friends and family members even after this period of isolation ends. Grief is natural, and most people are resilient. Though grief is difficult, it helps to recognize that it's natural and serves a purpose. Grief can help people turn inward and adjust to a new way of life without the people, places, or things they have lost. Research suggests that once a crisis has passed, most people are able to bounce back and move forward with their lives. Know that while grieving, it's normal to fluctuate between moments of sadness and mourning and moments of acceptance or even happiness. It's also important to remember that grief is temporary. The difficult feelings will pass. For more information on how to deal with the COVID-19 pandemic, visit APA's Pandemic Resource page.
Okay, thank you very much for that. That had a lot of, it was short, but it had a lot of helpful advice. Okay, so now I'm going to talk about children and death and how we can help our children grieve. First of all, the most important thing you need to remember with children is you have to listen well and listen without any judgment or preconceived notions. Okay? Talagang pakinggan natin sila. Do not assume what they know based on their age. Maliit lang yan, di ba? Hindi pa niya naintindihan. Or like, oh, maybe he already understands it because, you know, he's a teenager. Ask them what they know and then let them talk. No? Find out to what level, ano ba ang alam nila? What do they understand, right? And then just, you know, just listen to what they have to say. And then later on, you'll have an opportunity to affirm or to correct, no? Kung meron silang mga medyo off o medyo mali na sinabi. Remember, a child that is old enough to love is old enough to grieve. So kahit 3 years old, 4 years old pa lang, di ba the 3-year-old is able to love and show affection. Even a 2-year-old, they already sense that when there is a loss within the family. So they're old enough to love, so they're old enough to grieve. How do you explain death to children? Again, syempre, you take into consideration yung age, di ba? Yung developmental stage nila. Very important is you provide the essential facts. Essential facts, take note, about the death and the circumstances. Okay? Then, you give the child opportunities to ask questions as often as necessary. You know, a child who, like, let's say, lost a parent at, say, age 7, di ba? Siyempre, ang naiintindihan niya, konti pa lang. Diba? So, pagdating niya ng mga age 9 or age 10, he'll think of his father. So, there will be new, because he's older, his understanding is, you know, mas malawak. So, then he'll have questions again for the mother, di ba? And then at age 13 or 14, there will be newer questions, no? All the way until maybe young adulthood. So, we should never get tired of answering our children's questions, because, you know, as their understanding expands, so therefore they will also have or grow into more questions. Graphic details, okay, should be omitted. You don't have to go into the very small details or the gory details, or no need, you know, no need to explain that, especially to a child. So only the essential facts about the death. The goal is to provide an age-appropriate understanding of what happened so that the child can come to terms, no, that death is final, okay? That death is final, that, you know, the person who died is not going to come back anymore. With younger children, this is more difficult because, you know, when they watch cartoons or animation, di ba, namamatay, nabubuhay ulit. So, you know, that's their, like, understanding. This is true for very young children. So it's also important to find a way to explain that to them. There are no right words, but it is important to convey that it is a permanent, no? Death is permanent and that people cannot come back for it. And we don't like to use euphemisms. Oh, you know, he's sleeping. Because sometimes children, if you tell them he's sleeping, magkaka-fear pa yan, di ba? Parang matatakot na siyang matulog because mamaya, di na ako magising, di ba? Di na ako babalik. So, we don't like using euphemisms or even yung, you know, like I remember a story, you know, they were told that, oh, you know, they took your papa because God needed, you know, another angel. So like the little boy like grew up with, you know, parang galit siya kay God kasi nga, parang ang dami mo naman pwedeng kuning angel, bakit yung papa ko pa ang kinuha mo, diba? So we have to be very careful with how we explain it. Use the words death or died rather than other language, no? Like I said, rather than using euphemisms or saying passed away. Kasi pag bata ka, di ba, ano ba yung passed away? Di ba? You don't like really understand. So dapat, you know, it's clear. I mean, it's painful, but it has to be made clear and said in a way that, you know, the child will understand it. So examples, Death happens when a person's body gets very, very sick, okay? But not like a cold. Hindi parang sipon or lagnat lang, okay? And the body, stops working. Or the body is not breathing anymore, it doesn't need to eat. Stuff like that. The body doesn't hurt anymore, it's no longer in pain, right? They don't feel anymore what's painful. More than the words that you use, it's the message that is more important. Okay? And very young children, remember, they don't understand yet that death is irreversible. So medyo mas mahirap pang i-explain pag batang-bata pa. Parents and caregivers should check every now and then on the child's understanding and offer to be there for any questions. No? So every now and then you can open a conversation, you can talk about the loved one, but do not force them to talk about it if they do not want to. So they can be just sitting there and listening, and pag pinakwento mo, kung ayaw nila magkwento, huwag niyong pipilitin, di ba? Because they will share in their own time. But they're there. Children are like sponges. They listen, they take in everything. So dapat maingat din kayo, di ba? Whenever we are in the presence of children, especially young children, who take in everything, we have to be very, very careful with what we say, right? They watch, they listen all the time. Keep family routines as intact as possible, okay? And plan, so wag masyadong i-disrupt yung schedule, no? Because imagine, COVID-19 has disrupted already so many things for us. Then you disrupt it further. So the child's sense of safety and trust in the world will really be, shaken, okay? So plan opportunities for positive experiences, either as a family or for your child with their friends, kahit online, di ba? Kasi hindi naman sila nakikita, but there are a lot of online activities na pwede nilang gawin. Some things to remember. Let your child know that it is okay to show their feelings, okay? Let them know that it's okay to cry. You know how many times have I encountered people na parang, oh, I'm sorry, but can I cry? Is it okay to cry? Parang nahihiya sila. But I encourage crying. Crying is so good because it's a release. You have to let go of what's inside, right? And crying helps children feel better. So I'm asked, can I cry in front of my child? Yes, please do. But not naman in a way na matataranta yung bata, di ba? Pero kung gusto mong umiyak, it's okay because you're also role modeling for them, what it is to mourn well, di ba? If your children don't see you crying, di ba? Sila mismo, di ba? Parang, ay, hindi nga umiiyak si mommy o si daddy, so parang ako, bawal din, di ba? Hindi na lang, wag na lang. So it's good, show your children. But again, wag naman yung naglulupasay kayo, di ba? Kasi matataranta naman sila pag gano'n. Continue to invite your children to talk on several occasions over time, okay? These are difficult conversations, but tell your children, it's okay, it's good that we talk about it, but if you're not ready to talk, that's fine too, but is it okay? I'd like to, share, ganyan. Di ba you share memories or you talk about how you're feeling, so they'll listen. Maintain an emotional and physical presence with your children. So hugs, affection, talking, very, very important. No? If you're naman within a family, hindi naman yung bawal mag-hug or so you can do that. No? Even older children, you would think, oh, they don't no, they do actually, believe me. They still need the support and the assistance as they cope with the loss that they have been through. Children may express their feelings not through talking. They can draw, they can write. So it's good because if you look at their artwork, sometimes you can find out where they are, but also do not jump into conclusions. Like, let's say, for example, kakamatay lang. Tapos yung mga colors niya, di ba? Meron siyang mga rainbow, meron siyang, the colors are bright. Don't take that to mean that the child is okay because it could be that the child is at the point na hindi pa niya tanggap, di ba? So, let's not jump into conclusions. But it's always very interesting to look at their artwork, to look at their writings. With teenagers, if you're friends with your children on social media, that's usually what they use, what they post on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook. You can find out so many things about your young people if you pay attention to what they post on social media. So ask them to tell you about their artwork. No? Tell me what's happening, who's in the picture, bakit may kulang, di ba? Kung may kulang. So that's a good way to engage a child who is going through a loss. Allow your child to express anger because anger is real. You know, a child can feel anger, and you must explain that, you know, it's normal. It's understandable if you're feeling angry, but you also help the child to find appropriate and healthy ways, diba? Not harmful ways that will harm themselves or that will, you know, sometimes I think it was Dr. Banaag, in fact, who told me that, you know, grief in children is often expressed as anger. Diba? Kasi hindi naman sila maka-talk like the adults. So, minsan lalabas yan as anger. So, you find out, diba? Bakit parang palaaway or masungit or nagdadabog? You need to find a way to channel the child's grief into a healthier manner. Okay? Sports, dancing, rather than anger can be good. I remember I had a little boy. He was about 8 years old and his mother had died. And, you know, he had so much anger inside. And so I said, you know, we suggested, oh, what, you like boxing? You know, because magaling siya in another sport. I said, have you tried boxing? He said, no. Are you interested in trying boxing? So the father bought like a punching bag at home, you know, so yung galit niya, pinapunch niya yung punching bag every day for about a month, I think. Then his anger started to dissipate, and now he's like a young man who's so healthy and even tempered. Set limits on inappropriate behaviors. It's not okay for children to hit or hurt others, or for teens to put themselves and do risky behaviors, diba? Sometimes, you know, teens who have lost loved ones, parang, okay, you know, I want to test my mortality and all that. So you have to like sit them down and explain to them and really also find a way for them to release the pain, di ba? Kasi sometimes it's the pain that drives you to do or to commit risky acts. Okay, I think I'm on to my last 2 slides. So I want to talk briefly about hope and resilience. Okay, hope is so important. Wala na lahat, di ba? Wag lang ang pag-asa. But nowadays, it's like so hard some days, di ba? And with some families, especially if you've had one loss after another, how do you help families, you know, keep the hope? You know, how do you help them stay afloat? Ang maganda rin sa Pilipino, you know, is we have a very strong, we lean on our faith. So, you know, whether you're Catholic or Protestant or Muslim, or, you know, you believe in a higher power, and that really helps. I mean, I've seen that so many times in people who have strong faith systems. They can like navigate the lost journey much better than one who is not, you know, very much anchored. Hope is very important in times of overwhelm and despair, okay, fueling energies and efforts to cope and rebuild our lives. We hold on to hope in the midst of uncertainty. Diba? Like, okay, we're still gonna be here. If we're to believe the news reports, I don't know, maybe another 8 months. So are we ready for that? Diba? What can we do to keep our hope up? Okay? But Weingarten cautions us to practice reasonable hope and to avert false hope. Ayaw din natin ng false hope, because with false hope, when the person comes crashing, you know, that's another problem, right? So dapat tamang-tama lang. In working with COVID-related losses, we can help families reorient hope. As some hopes are lost, what can realistically be hoped for and work towards? You know, in grief education, there's something we call as meaning making. What is the meaning, diba? How do you find meaning in your loss? So as a you know, someone who helps families and children, you have to find out how, you know, help the person, help the family find meaning into their loss. Sometimes it can take a long time. No? Support may be needed to tolerate prolonged uncertainties and lengthy recovery processes while holding hope in future possibilities with sustained effort. Sabi nga nung my friend, who is very much, their business is, yun na nga, the funeral parlor business. He said, I think this grief pandemic is going to last so much longer than this pandemic. Even when the pandemic is already over, but parang gera yan eh, di ba? What are the spoils of, the collateral damage of the war? So, hindi naman yan, grief does not end, They ask, does grief end? No, grief doesn't end, You learn to make it a part of your life. You befriend it. As the years go by, the intensity decreases. But the grief will always be there. You just learn to make it a friend, and you learn to live with it so that it inspires you, or it fuels you to also help others, diba? Or fuels you to do better, diba? To become a better person. Studies have found that resilience is fostered by focusing efforts to master the possible, accepting that which is beyond our control, and coming to terms with what cannot be changed. So I think I highlighted this because this is so important. We have to know, right, what it is that is beyond our control, and we have to learn how to surrender that. For me, that's the most important lesson of this pandemic, is that it's really taught me how to surrender, because wow, diba? All of this is really beyond our control. But we also know that there are things that we can work on, diba? That we can still work and help within the parameters of our lives now. Okay? Things that we can change and we cannot change. I think this is my last slide now. Okay, this is my last slide. So whatever our adverse situation, no matter how difficult it is, remember that we can make the most of it, okay? Practicing the art of the possible. Do all you can with what you have, in the time you have, in the place where you are. So I know you're all coming now from all over the Philippines, and I'm happy that, parang this is a nationwide thing, because really, wherever you are, there is a job for you to do. Wherever you are, you have families to help, and that's why it's so important, especially during this time, to also don't forget to help yourselves and take care of yourselves. Also, so that we can continue, taking care of those who need our help. So I'll end there, and I hope that you found that helpful. Thank you very much.
Okay, so thank you very much, Miss Kathy, for that heartfelt and very timely talk. So thank you for sharing your personal and professional experience with us. Let's do some polls.
Mitch, before we do the poll, I just want to say how pleased we are. I think Kathy has walked us through something that we encounter so often in our lives, but we really don't talk about. When our patients die, we feel so sad. We say sorry to families, but we don't talk about the grief that we also go through. And even losing some of our own colleagues. I mean, the COVID had hit at home. We've lost many colleagues. Even in our specialty, we have lost colleagues. And we have not been really able to talk about that. So thank you, Kathy, for walking us through this. It's not just the knowledge of what it is like to suffer a loss, but also great practical tips on how we can help not only children, but one another. So I'm sure, Mitch, there will be a lot of questions. And Kathy will be around. If I can help, I'll try. But it's Kathy's ball game. Okay?
Yes, sir. But of course, he will be here and helping us to answer some of the questions as well. So shall we go on with the poll, or do we have questions ready to be read? Okay, so let me just start with the poll. So shall we start? This is the first question. when was the last time you saw a butterfly? For your options, a while ago, yesterday, a week ago, a month ago, a year ago, or I can't remember. Let me read that again. For the first question, when was the last time you saw a butterfly? That's a while ago, yesterday, a week ago, a month ago, a year ago, or I can't remember.
Tinago upang di ko mahanap kahit naliwanag ang buwan laging may sulok sa dilim.
So let's look at the answers. Most answered a week ago, 30%. Oh, you have to go out more. So you can see more of the butterflies. So 30% answered a week ago, 21% a month ago, and for the least number of answers would be 6% for a year ago. Okay. So for the next question, which do you prefer, sunrise or sunset? You can either answer sunrise or sunset. No option to answer both, just one. Choose one. Which do you prefer, sunrise or sunset? Choose either sunrise or sunset. Let's see the answers. So we are giving time for the questions to be integrated and consolidated. So which do you prefer, sunrise or sunset? Most answered sunrise, 64%. So 36% answered sunset. So everyone apparently wakes up early to see the sunrise.
And everyone, most people probably are hopeful.
Yes, sir. Yes, that's right, sir. They all appreciated the sunrise. So what is the color of Miss? This is the next question. What is the color of Miss Kathy Babao's eyeglasses? Is it red? Is it blue? Is it yellow? Or violet? It looks good on you, Miss Kathy.
Thank you.
So what is the color of Miss Kathy Babao's eyeglasses? Is it red? Is it blue? Is it yellow? Or is it violet? So let's see this answer, and then we'll look at your answers.
Yeah.
So everyone is looking at you, Miss Kathy.
Yeah.
But some answered differently from the one you're wearing. So the color of Miss Kathy Babao's eyeglasses, most answered red, 72%. As you can see, it's red. But I guess some are either colorblind or have a different color on their screen. 14% answered blue, 12% answered violet, and some answered yellow.
Very good, 72%.
Are really observing you and looking at you closely. So that's the last question. So let's again call on Miss Kathy Babao and Dr. Banaag to help us with the Q&A portion or open forum. So let me just, so we have several questions. The first question, this is the first one that appeared in our, let me. I cannot move my screen. So the question of Miss Mary Joy Dilason is saying, for Miss Kathy Babao, do you have any module material that professionals can utilize to facilitate processing of grieving or undergo training?
Well, yeah, occasionally I give training. Well, I haven't given training during this COVID. Actually, that's a good idea. Maybe I should. Yeah, I will probably do one before the end of the year. So I'll post it on my Facebook page or my Instagram. So I'm so millennial. So just follow me on my Instagram or my Facebook page, Kathy Babao there. I'll announce it there.
So Miss Bilason, just keep in touch and follow Miss Babo on her FB and Instagram. And then there's another one from, this is from our adolescent specialist, Dr. Emma Lianto. Let me read this. So she's saying, thank you, Miss Kathy, for the lucid and instructive talk. Are there bereavement care services either for free or at a cost that we can refer our patients to?
Bereavement services for free? Yeah, I believe there are, well, anyone who does, I think, psychological services for free, or doesn't PGH would probably like have free services, or probably other NGOs. I'll have to look it up, but there should be free services available. Or the religious, diba, with the church, I'm sure they also like provide free bereavement services.
And sometimes we have webinars as well that can
right.
They give a free talk.
Yes.
So another question, since grieving and mourning differ from person to person, when would you say that there is a need to raise a red flag, or maybe when does it become abnormal that professional help is already needed?
Okay. Yeah, I always say that you have to look out because there's like, sometimes it's a thin line. Is the person still in grief, or is the person depressed already? Because it's possible, grief they can go into a depression. So, Dr. Banaag, may I ask you to give the parameters for depression? So that, kasi for me, that's usually what I look at. That's a red flag already.
Actually, grief and depression manifest in very similar ways. The same symptoms we see, except that grief is a normal process, depression is an illness. So the question is, what is the red flag that this is no longer just grief, but has moved into a depression? If you don't mind, Kathy, can I take that on?
Yes, please, go ahead. Yes.
Maybe one is time. As we have said earlier, grief is a process we all go through. Sometimes it's complicated. It takes much longer. Different cultures have different ways of, quote, celebrating grief. We have rituals. In the Philippines, we have a very long period. It's a period of 1 year. We're given 1 year, yung babang luksa, assuming that by 1 year, everybody has gone through the grief process. However, someone who still cries, almost a year after and still misses, may have moved into a depression. Now, time is not always a good measure because actual depression, clinical depression can run parallel with the grieving process. And what is the point that we need to look at? Grief does not diminish the person who is grieving. We feel the sadness, we feel the loss, but it does not diminish us. Depression diminishes us. Depression expresses things, I'm useless, I'm no more, I should die, I am left alone, I cannot handle this because I am useless. Then maybe that's depression, parallel with the grief. And that's what we sometimes call a complicated grief, Now, do we medicate or not? We don't medicate grief. Don't ever medicate grief. We have to allow grief to go through its process. When we medicate that, we end up with what we often call as anniversary depression. In the death anniversary, there is depression, because we did not allow the grief process to go through. We interrupted it with medicine. But when there is depression, do we need to start medicating? It's a clinical judgment that we all need to be careful about. Remember, there is a parallel grief going on, and there is a depression going on. Maybe a lot of talking, supportive psychotherapy, grief counseling can help. But if in the end, the individual still does not want to eat, doesn't want to wake up, doesn't want to get up in the morning, only preoccupied with death and dying, and maybe even have suicidal thoughts, I think we need to medicate. Mhm. We have all the marks of a major depression. So we cannot take the risk of losing another one, this time through a major depression. So I think a good clinician may opt to start medicating the depression. So always remember, and one of the audiences that was listening to me one time was surprised to understand that grief is normal, or that sadness is normal and depression is not. There is a distinction between sadness that is expressed in grief and depression as an illness.
Okay. So I hope that answers your question to the one who asked the question. That, of course, when it becomes detrimental to your health, right, sir? And
Yeah.
if it's taking too long and you are still unable to cope, that it becomes abnormal, that you have to seek professional help. So you can have follow-up questions, kindly text them here or write them in the Q&A portion of our screen. If you have other questions, we have a lot actually. So you have 906 participants on Facebook, almost 1,000, plus the ones here on Zoom.
It's almost 2,000.
Another question.
Kathy, you're a magnet.
Everybody's interested, sir, and can relate.
It's a very timely topic kasi, Doc, di ba? So,
Oo, talaga. Mhm.
timely, yeah. Oh,
So
Doc,
this,
actually, I have a question for Dr. Wanaag. Can I ask a question? Because I see this a lot in my clients.
Ah,
We do a lot of talk therapy, but I am always worried when, they cannot sleep. Para bang no amount of talk therapy that we do, pagdating ng gabi, hindi pa rin sila makatulog and it goes on for extended time. So when that happens, I actually refer out to a psychiatrist because I can't prescribe, right? So
mm.
is
And
sleep is a good indicator.
oh yeah, it is. And I think it's a good decision to refer them to a physician, to a psychiatrist. It may be part of a depression, or even if it is not part of a depression, people have difficulty sleeping even when they're not depressed. Right now, sleep has become a problem. uh, for many of us, even me. When I wake up in the morning, I hit the bed. I wake up at 3 o'clock, go to the bathroom, hit the bed, and you sleep. But sometimes it's not easy to fall back to sleep. So this may be the effect of the pandemic beginning to weigh heavily on each of us. So when sleep is threatening our health, and neuroscience tells us that prolonged sleep deprivation can lead into anxiety disorder and into depression. So we need some help in sleep. There are a number of good aids in sleep. Marami naman, over-the-counter, sleepacil, melatonin. Some sedative can be given by doctors. If this over-the-counter sleep aids do not help, then maybe the doctors can help with some sedative that should be taken with caution. We don't want people taking sedative every night. So, but you're right, Kathy. When sleep is a major indicator that help may be needed.
Right. Thank you
right.
po.
Thank you, sir. So some questions here are for the children. So how do we, several questions, no? Let me just integrate them. So there was one question who, the comment was, how do you handle, what will you do to children in denial of the loss of a loved one? And like some children who would not want to see their loved ones up until they are buried. So can you please comment on that?
it's hard, no, kasi she doesn't indicate what the age of the child is. So, but in general, you cannot force acceptance. You know, acceptance will come when it will come. You can just support the child and wait for, wait for a time. Maybe if the denial is harmful already, then that's a time when you can, step in and probably bring the child to a professional. With the child not wanting to see the person until the burial, you again, you cannot force it, because if you force it, then that can be like traumatic pa to the child, and
Yeah.
dadalin-dalin niya yon hanggang sa paglaki niya, right, doctor? Right, Doc B?
Yes. Yes. And also we have to recognize that at a certain age, like children very young, 3, 4, 5, even 6, or maybe even 7-year-olds, the experience of grief waxes and wanes. They are in grief, but when they have their friends around, they'll play like they're having fun, you know. But when they're alone, they feel the sadness. So we should not be deceived by the happiness we see in our children while they're grieving. I mean, while the period of grief is still going on, and say na, ay nako, salamat, natapos na yung grief niya. No, at night they cry. At night they look at the picture of the lost parent, you know, and they cry. But when they have their playmates around, they play and enjoy the games, you know, and they talk to their friends like nothing has happened. So with young children, the expression of grief waxes and wanes.
True.
Okay. So in relation to that, sir, there was a question, or what if the child has lost her memory of losing her mother in an early age? If that is a defense mechanism that will be helpful, or does it predict problems later on?
I don't think, well, it depends on the age that
Yeah.
they the parent. But, I have had clients who are adults already, and they lost their parent when they were 3 or 4. But they have that, sometimes they have that single, like that 1 or 2 memories that really stand out. So, I believe that, well, I've seen it myself, that, they never really forget. Again, it depends, on the age. So baka ngayon lang you think that, they've forgotten, but believe me, they really don't. There's always that one single memory that, that stands out.
That's very true. Even when they say they don't remember, there are snippets of memories, you know, that sometimes even they get surprised about. Mhm. And a lost parent is not necessarily lost forever. They are carried in the mind of the child. They even talk to their parents in their mind. They continue the relationship as though it's still ongoing, you know. This is the richness of the imagination of childhood that we, unfortunately, as we grew up, we lost that imaginativeness, you know, for better or for worse. But for children, many of them, they carry the memory like their parents are still there. They talk to them, mhm, because they remember them.
Okay, so other questions are related to that. When initially the child would have a loss of memory of losing, let's say, the father, and then later on would relate or would give questions or refer to the father, even if initially the memory was lost. So that's
Well, you
explained
know,
right there.
Mitch, maybe I should
Yes,
add
sir.
that we cannot
Yes,
force the
sir.
memory. If the father was lost at 1 year old, we cannot expect a child to have a memory of a lost parent, or even at 2 years old, you know.
Mhm.
But the memory is built over time by the collection of stories that a child hears about her father or about her mother. And so the child forms the image of the lost mother and may in fact carry it like the mother is always there talking to her and she talking to the mother, because he or she builds the image of the mother in her own memory. It is from the others that she hears what the mother was like, what the father was like. And so, like Kathy said, we need to be very careful about what we say. Because, like Kathy said, children are like sponges. We don't want a child to hear, ay naku, naman tatay niya, lasenggo eh, babaero yun eh. You don't want a child to carry those bad memories. You're penalizing a child for something she never even had experienced. We want every child to reserve a certain good memory of parents because those of us who continue to carry bad memories of parents carry the pain. The pain of anger, the pain of guilt, and sometimes that's what makes us patients. So we want our children always to carry a good memory of their parents. And even if they had been quote unquote bad people when they were alive, spare the children of that image.
So that's good tip. So please try not to badmouth
Yeah.
the person and the memory of that person to children because they retain those stories.
Mm-hmm.
And if I may refer to that, even with let's say not just the loss of a parent, but maybe with families that have split or are broken, and one parent who probably badmouth another, so that again is not helpful.
Yeah.
I read some of Miss Cassie's articles on that.
Yeah.
Not helpful at all. Yeah, not helpful.
Because some would make their children as outlets, so and then would badmouth the other partner.
No, don't do that.
No, that's burdening your children.
Yes, yes. And then there's another question here. How does grieving improve or help our mental health? I think that has been answered. Or are there stages in grieving?
No stages. There's there's the 5 stages of grief of Kubler-Ross, but that's really more for people at the end of life. And they're good, parang markers, but don't think of them as 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. It doesn't work that way with grief. There are no
Chronology.
doesn't happen in a chronological order. Yeah.
Okay, so it may be different for each and everyone.
Yeah.
There was a question here on how do we deal with families who they say nangaaway ng mga doktor and health workers when a relative dies in the hospital. Practical tips.
Yeah, well, that's
what can we say?
Yeah, yan yung grief niya, Yan yung grief niya, nilalabas niya. He's finding people to blame, maybe he feels there's some guilt or there's some regret. So I would sit the person down and listen to him and ask him, so where is your anger from? Diba? Bakit ka ba galit na galit? And see what that person has to say, and then take it from there. Ngayon, kung talagang super destructive siya, baka time to seek professional help, But usually, in the initial stages, there's really so much anger. So just sit the person down, support the person, be with them. But if hindi talaga mapigilan, then bring them to a professional for further help.
Okay, so another one, is it okay to show emotions such as crying? Sir, you wanted to say something?
Before we leave that, kasi kanina maganda yung question, yung grieving and mental health, I think grief needs to be expressed. We have to encourage that. In words, in tears, and this may have something to do with the next question, because unspoken grief leave permanent unconscious impact on our mental health. It may be a source of repeated sadness that sometimes we treat as depression when in fact it's recurrences of a grief process, So I think grief is something that we need to talk about with friends, not necessarily with professionals. But when it becomes unspoken and then continues to impact on our mental health, and we don't even know why we're feeling sad and angry and why we're crying, at the loss of a little thing, because that loss triggers, kumbaga may pinaguhugutan. Hanggang hindi nalalaman kung ano yung hinuhugot, paulit-ulit yung proseso na yon. So, because grief was never given the opportunity to be spoken, to be encouraged to really experience it and go through it.
That's true.
And I think the next question has something to do with that, about tears.
Yes, about crying, so in front of a client.
Yes.
Is
Client,
it okay?
They themselves, or you yourself crying in front of your client. Well, siguro wag naman yung parang sobra-sobra pa yung tears mo sa client mo, di ba? I mean, that's happened to me. It's like yung parang nangingilid na yung luha mo because, di ba, when you're in the therapeutic, relationship, you put yourself in it, right? I mean, that's how I like. So sometimes it, kind of hits you and you have a lump in your throat and all that. So as long as you don't get to a point naman that it's your client already comforting you, right? It's good to empathize, but you also have to rein it in a bit. Dr. Panag.
Yeah. In psychiatry, we have a term called counter-transference. Kumbaga, meron kang dala-dala na ngayon mo ini-experience doon sa pasyente mo, We all need to be very careful about that. But to feel the sadness with someone who is grieving, I think is a very decent emotion. Cathy said, hindi ka naman you'll boulder, parang ikaw yung nawalan ng lolo o nanay, parang narire-experience mo your own loss with this patient. Hindi na alam ng pasyente kung siya ang pasyente o siya na or that's a disaster, That's why helping professionals should be aware of what they carry with them as they help their clients. We use what we carry with us as part of the tool for healing of our clients. Most of us who are in this helping, healing professions are wounded. I think we got attracted into helping profession because of our own woundedness. We want to use it to understand others and help them recover. And Kathy mentioned in the lecture a very beautiful word, compassion. Buddha said, the only way we can heal our wounds and sorrows is to touch them with compassion. And so when we feel teary-eyed with our patients, I think they will understand the empathy, the compassion, and that can be an element to their own healing.
Agree.
So there is a time for us as physicians and counselors to grieve, and there is a time for the patient to grieve. Wag sumabay, sir?
Yeah. Kinokontrol din natin, baka mataranta yung pasyente, naawa sa atin.
Right.
And then there's an important question here. What if the child feels guilt? How do we handle that?
Well, then you have
on the loss.
Yeah, you have to explain to the child that whatever happened to the parent is not, it's not of his own doing. Kasi sometimes, siguro, I'm just guessing, maybe the relationship with that particular parent was not, just to cite an example, was not all that pleasant, diba? Maybe the parent was so strict. So sometimes as a child, you're thinking, ay naku, mamatay ka na sana, diba? Or something like that, they think in their head. And then it happens, right? So then there's so much guilt. So you have to find out where the guilt is coming from. Sometimes the child will say, sometimes the child will not say, but yeah, it's important to give the child assurance that no, it's not because of what you thought or what you said that that made it.
Yes. That's very true. And children do not say their guilt. They express it in maladaptive behavior. You have a child who's very intelligent, and this is one of my patients a long time ago. And well, this time it is the lola who's taking care of them. Nainis siya sa lola niya kasi pinatulog siya, nanonood pa siya ng TV. And going to his bedroom, he half murmured, sana mamatay ka. And sure enough, the grandmother died that night of a heart attack. how much more frightening that is, the power of one's own wish that children have, And so this person, this young kid, very small pa siya noon, was referred to me not because of feeling guilt, but because he kept failing in school, he kept fighting his friends, he's always getting hurt, accidental, hurting himself. These are all reflections of self-punishment, for a guilt that's not spoken. So there is opportunity in therapy to bring that out.
True, true.
Okay. So I guess that's also the answer to dealing with behavior problems in school. So therapy.
Mhm. Well,
And
problems in school, Mitch, are
yes,
the
sir.
children signal that there is something wrong. They're not able to say, I'm feeling sad, I'm feeling angry. No, they express their distress through their behavior. Mhm.
Okay. So the teacher should be more sensitive to
Yes,
uh,
Absolutely.
yes.
yes,
Absolutely.
So because sometimes it would escalate na the behavior problems would the child would either hurt himself or others
yeah.
before
Mhm.
it can be dealt with. Okay.
Yeah, it's a red flag. It's not meant to annoy anyone, It's a red flag saying something is wrong. I'm not happy with my life. Mhm.
Yes. So and then there is a question on what if the child died before the parents? How do parents cope?
Oh,
Mm.
that's a whole discussion.
Yeah.
That's a whole webinar in itself. No.
Oh, yeah. You open a can of worms.
Yes.
It
Maybe for
requires,
our next webinar.
Next
yeah.
webinar. Okay.
But you see, as a group of people had ranked stresses. Ano mga stresses? It used to be thought the loss of a spouse is a major stress.
Yes.
It is a major stress, and it used to be rated as number one. Recent findings show that the death of one's child is even a bigger stress for parents. And it's very difficult to recover from the loss of one's child.
Yes. So maybe that would be the topic, yes, sir. For
Yes.
for another. So in the interest of time, I have to just read maybe one or two more questions, and then there was a question here on what to do for children whose parents are suffered from the hands of for EJK and would want to seek revenge, would tell the counselor they would want to seek revenge against the police. I guess counseling, sir.
Sir Banaan na yan.
Yeah, it's more than just grief, It's a lot of anger for an injustice, And the child is seeking justice. We have to recognize and acknowledge the child's need for justice. But there must be better ways of, arriving at justice than killing someone. Mhm. Hitting back and killing the person. So we need, it will require a long counseling, but the message is an affirmation that you have a right to your anger and you have a right to want to have a revenge, but there are other ways of doing that. You cannot just kill because that brings a bigger burden for you that you will have to live with for the rest of your life. Mhm.
And especially in the case of EGK, a lot of these children witness the killing of their parents. So
Yeah.
it becomes even more complicated, di ba, Doc? Because they're,
Yeah, yeah.
yeah,
Mhm.
malalim masyado.
So I guess for the last question, it's we are out of time. But how do you know if you are finally healed?
How do you know if you're finally healed? Well, you begin to return to, you begin to return to your old, your not my old ways, but you're able to reinvest again in life, reinvest in other people. Yeah, you're able to go back, and then maybe when you think of you don't cry as much. Healing kasi is like a whole process. There's no end point. I guess that's what I'm trying to say. You can't like say I'm 100%, I'm 100% healed, because you're never really gonna get to that point. But baby steps, little by little, as you go back to your work or to the things that you used to love, then that's a sign of healing. When you can think of your loved one and you're not crying all the time, then it means you're healing. But you can talk about the person without breaking down, it means you're healing. So it's a whole process.
I, I like the word that you use, Kathy, reinvest,
Yes.
reinvest into something. And that is the work of grief. Removing the emotional investments in the someone who died. And it's very, very difficult to do that. We feel guilty when we stop loving someone who died, when we start thinking, oh, I've forgotten him. We feel guilty sometimes. But we need to do that. We cannot keep that investment forever in a dead person. We need to pull it back and reinvest. Reinvest in the things around us, re-engage in the realities around us. That means we are slowly getting over the grieving process. That's
Yes.
why grief is work. It is a work of the mind and the heart. Mhm.
I think rather than saying that, am I healed? What I always use and what I always tell my clients is, you get to a point where you have reconciled with your loss. I think for me, that's a more appropriate term. You've reconciled with it. It becomes a part of your life. It becomes a part of your being, but it doesn't dictate anymore, di ba? Everything that you do, because now you've reinvest. So to our words, reconcile and reinvest.
Yeah,
And it means you're moving forward beautifully in the best way that you can.
yeah. Mhm.
Okay. So any other last tips or words to our viewers? There are so many questions, and I guess for a theater, this is SRO. It's a blockbuster. So any last message, Miss Kathy, and then Dr. Banaag?
Yeah. Well, first of all, thank you for hosting this webinar and for this opportunity to speak to not naman everyone in the Philippines, but almost like 2,000, I think. So
Yes.
hope you picked up something that you can bring to your families and to your practice and to all the children that you help. So thank you for doing that. Thank you for doing that kind of work. So siguro, two messages lang. One, it's hard work that you're doing. It's hard work. So always, make sure to take care of yourself so you don't burn out, because there are a lot of people who are depending on you and the work that you do. And the second point, I think, is, um, huwag tayo mawawalan ng pag-asa, di ba? We just have to hang on. We don't know how much longer, but keep in your head that this is going to be over at some point. So let's keep the hope and keep the faith, keep the faith. We'll get through this as long as we continue to support each other and as long as we continue to be kind to each other. That's our way through. Kindness and compassion will be our way through until we get to the other side.
Yes. Mhm. So, you want me to say
Yes,
something?
sir. Yes, sir.
First of
Yes,
all, I
Hubert.
really want to congratulate the organization of Ako Para sa Bata for taking this topic on for the first time in a long, long time. We know, I have endless admirations for people who work with Ako Para sa Bata. We know what that terrain is all about. It's all about the abuses of children go through. And as we work with them, we don't only feel the compassion, we also feel a lot of grief. We feel a lot of grief, and we don't talk about that. Mhm. So I am very glad that we brought this on the table and we had an expert, Miss Cathy, And I'm so deeply, deeply grateful for what she has shared, because this has given us an opportunity to look at our own selves, those of us who work with abused children. I have done that, and I know what I had to go through, you know. I could privately cry for a child that had been abused, you know. And it's a form of grieving. But we don't talk to each other about that. We keep going on with our work. So I'm glad that we are given this platform to recognize that. I congratulate all the people who organize this. I admire all the people who work with children who are abused. But let us be mindful of the impact that that is doing to us. It's also trauma for us. We need to be mindful of how we are getting traumatized by this, and we need to talk to one another by the experiences, the painful experiences that we all share. And so I'm deeply grateful to Miss Kathy for helping us walk through this very difficult, very complex process of confronting our own griefs, because we need to do that.
Yes, I agree. And so thank you also, Dr. Banaag, for paving the way, for allowing us and helping us invite Miss Kathy to be our speaker for today, and for all your insights. I guess this webinar has helped not just us in dealing with the kids, but also personally with our experiences. So thank you for giving us hope, and we hope to be more resilient in the future when we take on challenges. So thank you.
Taguan